Perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. When a person repeatedly fails to become someone who sincerely he wants to be, what's the problem? Most people already have an answer. We simply need more information. If we knew more, understood more, became more aware, then surely we would change. For a while, that explanation sounds convincing. It allows us to believe that transformation is simply a matter of learning something that we do not yet know. But before accepting that diagnosis, let's examine it. Because if ignorance is the problem, knowledge should solve it. Yet most people already know certain things they should do and certain things they shouldn't do. They've heard truth, agreed with it, perhaps even defended it, and yet they continue living against it. And if we're honest, that becomes difficult to explain away. Now, perhaps this is the point where some people lose interest, because conversations about human behavior are comfortable as long as they remain abstract, psychological, philosophical, or observational. A person can discuss ideas for hours, provided those ideas never begin examining them. But the atmosphere changes once the investigation becomes personal, especially when the questions begin approaching responsibility, surrender, or God. At that point, many people would rather step away, not necessarily because the conversation is false, because it has stopped describing humanity and started describing them. So if none of this feels familiar to you, if you've never experienced the strange frustration of knowing exactly what ought to be done while simultaneously resisting it, then perhaps this conversation is not for you. But if you've experienced that conflict, if something within you already recognizes what is being described, then continue listening carefully, as perhaps we've ruled out one explanation. Perhaps the conversation is not about ignorance. And what remains? Maybe it's confusion. Or is it? Most people aren't confused at the times they fail. Often they know precisely what ought to be done, and still something resists. Notice something everyone's experienced. A person makes a sincere promise to himself. I'll begin tomorrow. I won't do this again. This time will be different. The promise is real. The intention is genuine. And yet before long, the very same person becomes the one who breaks it. That should strike us as strange. Who made the promise and who broke it? It's almost as though there are competing loyalties within the same person. Not two minds, not two personalities. One person, one will, drawn in opposite directions. And perhaps that's the diagnosis. Not ignorance, not merely confusion, division. There's a split, not around you, within you. Part of you recognizes what's right. Another part resists surrendering to it. And that division does not remain hidden. It quietly begins shaping everything you do, until a person sincerely desires change while continuing protecting the very thing preventing it. Not because every promise was insincere, but because the will itself has become divided. And over time, we become remarkably skilled at living this way. We explain it, we normalize it, we learn to call it simply being human. But perhaps that's precisely the mistake. Perhaps compromise has become so familiar that it no longer feels like compromise. It feels like identity. This is just who I am. But perhaps it isn't. Perhaps it's the person you permitted yourself to become. And this explains why a divided life never becomes whole. Not because reality is unclear, but because the self has become internally divided. And this is why so many people remain unchanged. Not because transformation is impossible, but because as long as our deepest allegiance remains divided, every attempt at self-made wholeness is eventually pulled back toward that division. So perhaps you don't need more information. Perhaps you already possess more truth than you're presently willing to live. The question is no longer, what do I know? Or even, what rules me? Perhaps the deeper question is this: what kind of person would remain perfectly aligned with reality, with truth, with goodness, under every circumstance? Because if such a person never existed, perhaps humanity is simply incapable of becoming whole. But what if a person has existed? Maybe the deepest tragedy isn't that humanity became fractured, but maybe the greater tragedy is that we spent so long looking at broken humanity that we've forgotten what an undamaged human being even looks like. Perhaps we've mistaken the damage for the design.